everyone. My name is Peg Dawson. I'm the author of a number of books on executive skills, and I'm about to record an interview with Rachel Ramsey, who I will introduce in a minute. But this interview will go on both her website and mine. So, as I say, my background is executive skills, and Rachel is a teacher that I met several years ago when she was enrolling in a doctoral program and deciding that she was going to focus on executive skills for her dissertation. So I visited her school. We've been in touch since then. I've watched what she's done both with her dissertation and career along the way, and she has become such a huge cheerleader for executive skills that I thought it'd be really fun just to introduce her to my crowd and introduce myself to her crowd and just find out a little more about what she's done and let you all know what she's done. So, Rachel, first, maybe you should talk about what you teach and where you teach.
Sure. Thanks so much for doing this. I'm really excited to kind of highlight this and, as you say, sort of have our crowds kind of mesh together a little bit. I'm a sixth grade teacher at McKelvey Intermediate School in Bedford, New Hampshire, where I have been for the last 22 years.
You don't look old enough to have been.
I don't.
I'm sorry.
I don't feel old enough. It's actually my 24th year teaching. Wow. But I like to think that because I work with 11-year-olds all the time, that's keeping me young.
Right. Probably.
So currently I'm teaching social studies. I've taught math, ELA, because it's a sixth grade intermediate school. You kind of go where the need is. So I've had the pleasure of working with a number of different people and different configurations over the years.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. And so as a public educator, how did you first become interested in executive skills?
It's really funny. We actually were doing a district workshop day, and we were sitting down and we were listening to a person, Sarah Ward, speaking about executive skills. And my teaching partner at the time turned to me. She's like, "You kind of do a lot of this already." And I started thinking about it. And as she kept speaking, it kind of was speaking to my heart. And the more that she's like, "You kind of do that too. You kind of do that too." And I was sort of bit by the bug. And I started doing a little more reading on really what was executive skills or executive function. And I went to one of her workshops and I read actually a couple of your books, and I just started digging into it and going through all of that. And one of the things that I noticed was a lot of it was geared for like working in small groups or one-on-one. And I wanted to bring it into my classroom as a whole group kind of a thing. So I started figuring out, what can I do to take all of this and, for lack of a better word, like globalize it within my classroom. What can I do so that I can infuse all of this kind of seamlessly into what we're already doing? So it's not an add-on. It's not something extra that the kids are working with. We can just kind of put that in. And that first year, I saw some amazing things happening with the kids. And I interviewed them at the end, and their words and their thoughts were so powerful that I was like, I need to keep going with this. I need to keep learning more. I need to keep trying on more things and layering it in. And it got to the point where when the kids would go to IAs, integrated arts, sometimes called specials, depending on which school you're in, would come to me and say, "Your kids can function and shift really well, and it's noticeably different. What are you doing?" And that's when I started doing like some workshops just within my building. And then I started doing some in my district. And then I started doing some kind of in the state of, here's what I'm doing. And I found that it was speaking to other people, and I was able to collaborate with others and learn more about it. And that's really where my kind of passion grew, because I could see the kids not just learning content, but learning about themselves as human beings and being able to function more successfully, regardless of what was happening in their worlds at home.
Oh, cool. And so it sounds like it started out with you reading and doing workshops and thinking, okay, people are applying this with individual kids in small groups, but I think there's a classroom application for this.
Absolutely.
And then
I kept going with it so much. One of my dreams forever has been, because I just love learning, was earning a doctorate. And I started looking into programs of what was going to work for me as a full-time educator, also trying to balance that. And the first thing they asked us when we go in is, what's your passion? What do you want to really be studying? And I knew I wanted to study executive skills, but I had no idea how I wanted to make that happen. And what kind of a study would I create? And looking through everything, it was pretty obvious there was a lot of quantitative work out there, but there was very little qualitative, which was ironic because I really wanted to go the quantitative route.
Mm-hmm.
And yet the literature was telling me to go qualitative. I'm really happy it did. And I had an amazing cohort of people who kept kind of pushing my thinking and challenging as I was trying to evolve what I wanted this study to look like. I knew I wanted to work with adolescents and middle level learners.
Mm-hmm.
I also knew I wanted to make sure that the participants, those students who were working with me, to get something out of it and feel some sense of kind of empowerment throughout it, so that it was a win-win for both of us. And I couldn't figure out how to do that. And then I found we started doing a little bit of work with youth participatory action research. And all of a sudden, all of those different pieces that they had been challenging me to do kind of fell into place. And I really had a eureka moment of, oh, that's what I can do.
So you got to explain some terms here. First of all, talk about qualitative research, because I guess my guess is there are people who don't understand that distinction, and then talk about the youth participatory action research, so people understand what you're talking. And then go into a description of what your actual dissertation.
Okay. So qualitative research is more about collecting stories and words and finding themes within those. It's still scientific method. It's still as rigorous as quantitative, although you're focusing on a smaller sample size. So you can't really say that it's generalizable without doing more repeat studies, but you really get to the heart of what your participants are saying. And you're trying to capture those words and find ways where you can kind of create a model of sorts and themes of what all comes together here. What are some potential patterns, if you will, that you could look for in other research? I think it's really important to say that qualitative is not less than or more than quantitative. It's a different path.
Sure.
And then youth participatory action research, a number of people have heard of action research, where the researcher is basically a part of the study, whatever it is. It could be for educators looking at curriculum and how is it working in your classroom and studying that, where youth participatory action research is where the students, and it's typically all the research I found, there are students, whether it's being studied in a school or with young people, are driving the action research. So they're choosing what their topic is, what's their concern, and how are they going to study it. And then the adults are really there to help them get the resources and navigate some of those doorways and opening them so that the students can share it, collect their information, and then present it in a way. Sure. And all the things I've read about it, the research they come up with is amazing.
Right. So how did the students you were working with were seventh graders? Is that right?
Correct.
And they were at a different school than the one you work at. Is that right?
They were in a different district entirely. So they didn't know me at all.
Right. So how did you help them decide on the topic that they wanted to pursue? And then how did that connect with executive skills?
That's a great question. One of the things that I did was I came in and I told them that I wanted to help them with a school improvement project. And to me, that seems like something that is very much an adolescent developmental thing of, here are things that I'm noticing that I don't like, that I want to change. And it's a really wonderful way to kind of embrace that. That's also something that they all would have in common. That was their common experiences, even though I had participants who were in different social groups, different academic experiences. So we kind of had the gamut. The students that were picked out as participants all were I don't want to say identified because that wasn't it, but adults in the building recognized that they struggled with executive skills.
Okay.
And so my purpose was sort of twofold: watching their executive skills as they went through this process for students who have been kind of noticed as struggling with these, and how does this, throughout this process, does it change their outlook and their executive skill usage?
Mm-hmm.
And so those two things were kind of parallel. And what I would do is I would spend once a week with them, which was a lot for me to negotiate for about 6 months, is going to their school an hour and a half before mine started, and then zipping over and shifting gears. So I didn't get a lot of sleep. Sleep was not on the table. And what I would do is I'd focus on a focus group of just tell me, what do you notice about school? What are some of the things that you feel about being here in school? And I would record that. And then the next week we would focus on, what do you want to do for your school improvement project? How do you want to collect that information? What do you want to do? And I would just help them kind of craft that. And they decided they wanted to create a survey to ask the rest of the building what they noticed, and then, which they did. And we had to go through, they had to write permission forms for the parents and for the students to sign. We had to get the administration and the staff members to agree. So there was some give and take with the wording of some of their questions. And we had to also work a little bit more on making some of the questions more open-ended and less guided with their own opinions. But they were really good about doing that. And then we collected all that data, and they decided they wanted to create a master schedule proposal based on their experiences and what the students did, and present it to the administration of their school.
Oh, interesting. So that was what emerged when they did that first stage of polling or surveying students, that the schedule was an issue.
It was the things that they noticed were all the things that a lot of the students said. And one of the biggest things they took away was a lot of students didn't want to fill it out because they didn't feel like anything was going to actually come of it. And that was really important. So they wanted to find a way where everyone would see that something came from what they asked. And a lot of the things that the kids said that they wanted, the participants felt they could address by reorganizing the schedule a little bit and addressing issues that as adults in the building, probably we wouldn't have ever noticed. And I say we, but some of the issues they brought up, I was like, oh, that would have never been anything on my radar as an adult, as something that would be really big.
Right.
And then they put this really complicated schedule together, with which I really had very little to no help, because it kind of made my head explode. Scheduling and master schedules, there was a lot of moving parts. And then they presented it to the principal, and they had a really amazing give and take conversation and figuring out still what were some of the challenges. And ultimately she took some of their suggestions to heart and embraced them.
Wow, you're right. That's pretty empowering. So what did you learn in terms of their executive skills? How did that play out over the course?
So I had them fill out the executive skills questionnaire that probably can be found on your website. And I had them take that at the beginning and at the end. And that was a really important piece, because it's a self-assessment. So it's, how are they viewing themselves? Right. And one of the ways that I was also looking at this in terms of research was from the positive psychology angle of, what if instead of telling kids via what we do or don't do that they're broken or there's something wrong, that we say, you have it, we just have to allow you the opportunity to embrace it. And so we did it in January, we did it again in June, which was kind of an interesting time of year, because a lot of these students were going to be going into summer school with competency recovery. So they did not have a positive view of their academic journey at that point. And yet, out of 7 out of the 12, their planning executive sub skill, they went up. significantly. And so again, that was their perception of that. And in creating a master schedule, that's all about planning. And so to have that many students see that change, particularly when they were not in a positive mindset for school, I found extraordinarily telling about the whole process. That foundation of in doing something in a positive environment could translate into an environment where it was like for them, a lot of them, a negative mindset, that still was able to cross over, really substantiated that those small little pieces that we can do within a classroom or as adults or as caregivers really can make a huge impact in what they're able to access. It's not necessarily that they have it or they don't have it. I really don't love the executive dysfunction phrase at all, because again, it implies that there's something wrong. Of course, they don't have their executive skills all grown. They're not going to get that till they're in their mid-20s. So, but they do have them.
Right.
And if we can allow them to foster that and flourish, there's a lot more there than I think sometimes we can give them credit for.
Sure. So not only did they strengthen their planning skills, which that's wonderful face validity, because that's mostly what they were doing as part of that project was planning, and they could see that they were getting better at that. But I mean, from reading your dissertation, you also saw positive signs of them accessing other executive skills as well. Can you just give a couple of examples of how you saw that? You know, anecdotal, I realize, but they're wonderful examples.
I think some of the key things, I'll share this one piece because it's not, I thought it was so powerful. And it's one of the ones that sort of stuck out to me, even as we were discussing it, was the student who wanted to change his name because he really felt if he changed his name, people would look at him as a whole new person. And ironically, he was one of the people who pretty much drove this master schedule and was able to see that. And through this master schedule, they were also able to show a huge amount of first goal-directed persistence. They had a lot of stumbling blocks. There were definitely a lot of challenges, and some things that they could have taken as like, you know what, see, the adults aren't really supportive. We're not going to keep going. And they did. And what they did was they shifted and they flexed and they adjusted some of their survey questions. They didn't get upset. They didn't argue. And sometimes they would come in pretty elevated from something that would happen in their first period class. And the way that they were able to kind of, I always say the word like channel their energy, the way they were able to bring their focus back. And even after some of those perceived negative interactions, still able to show flexibility and stick to their goal of doing some school improvement, even despite some pretty big hurdles that a lot of us, if we were experiencing that every day, I think we would find a new job. You know, or we would choose a totally different path. And they were still being super flexible and adjusting and empathetic to one another and hearing things and supporting one another. Like the student, they supported him in a way that was empathetic without pity, without like, oh, poor you. Yes, it's horrible. But they validated what this participant was saying without, and yet here we are, we're gonna do this.
Yeah. No, as I recall, also the other thing that really impressed me was these were kids who were not big writers.
No.
And yet you never got any resistance to the writing they had to do as part of this project.
None of it, despite the fact that they came in and multiple times talked about how much they hated writing and English language arts. You're right. And they were writing things that were really, I think they saw that it was important. You need to have a permission slip. That's an important piece. You needed to have announcements to get the word out. You needed to understand that you were going to have to really edit your survey questions, you know, and they were very particular about making sure that it was spelled correctly and there was punctuation. And never once did I have to remind them to look for any of those. Sometimes I would have to phrase a question of, does it look the way that you want it? But I can't tell you how many times there have been where I'm like, are you sure that's a sentence in my classroom? Like, are you sure it's just not a group of words hanging out? So all of those pieces, again, it highlighted that they felt like this was important work.
Yeah.
And because it was important to them and they had that goal and that they wanted to do something with it. And I think it really spoke to developmentally where they are and what they wanted to do and be a part of the change.
Sure. So what's your takeaway from that in terms of how you teach now? I mean, you learned some lessons from letting those kids go and do that cool project, but how do you carry that over into your classroom teaching now?
I did learn a lot. And even as I was going through the data collection process, I started continuing to tweak things that I was doing because, again, qualitative is not really generalizable. However, there were some things that they said that really spoke to me. And I was thinking, you know what, even as an adult who's aware of executive skills, I still have some room for improvement of how I can embrace this and allow them opportunities. And then throughout this process, I was also learning a little more about gamification, and that can look very different. And I've always loved games. However, there was a lot more when I was really looking into game theory and gamification and the different variables of what that looks like. It's like, you know what, I can meld these two together because this is exactly the opportunity to allow kids access to practicing executive skills. Games are all about your goal directed persistence and flexibility and handling those challenges in a way that feels safe, right? If you lose a game, you lose a game. If you do poorly on a test and you're really worried about your grades and that's really important to you, that's high stakes. That's not an opportunity where you're going to take a risk, which means your executive skill access is probably not going to be as open as you would be. So I started taking my units and creating a game to the whole thing. And within that, I allow students some choice within assignments and choice of when they need to complete assignments, which means they also need to be aware of when they're due, when they need to be completed, and they've got to plan things out. So if they know they need to get to here by this day in order for you to achieve, whatever that game is talking about, right now they're in the middle of being secret agents, and we are trying to defeat the organization, which is this mystical, nebulous antagonist that we have. Although some of the kids have secretly said they think it's some of the teachers in the building. And so they're constantly aware of who's around. And so they're being very sneaky about it. And they choose when they're going to do an assignment, which means they can figure out for themselves for task initiation. We've had this conversation. Do I want to start with the things that are easier to get me started? Or do I want to start with the things that are hard and get them out of the way? And different kids in the same classroom have different approaches to that. Well, allowing that time where they can figure out which of these things they want to get done allows them to embrace that task initiation. So I don't see as many kids struggling with that. We've also put a name to it, and we've talked about what are some strategies we can do about task initiation and how can we do that. So by allowing them to be in a place where they're excited to be, and there's some positive pieces and gamification, and it can get intense. So the kids who are struggling with emotional control, we have a lot of conversations about that. There's a lot of opportunities, and sometimes I'm like, why am I doing this? But as I go throughout the year and I see them in May and June, that's exactly why I'm doing it this way. And they're excited to be there.
Yeah. So putting a label on the executive skill that they need to play those games or to do that schoolwork or whatever, that's a nice segue into talking about your YouTube channel, because that's really devoted to giving kids labels and helping them understand this. So talk a bit about that.
That was another really amazing part of my program. So one of the things that they did that was different was we had to create a comprehensive project. And I wanted to find a way. Again, I think this speaks to what I want to do is I want to share this with as many people as I can and adolescents in particular of you're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you if you struggle to get started on things, or you always forget to turn that paper in, and finding a way where I could speak sort of directly to them. And in trying to figure out the process through that, I kept thinking about YouTube, and I did some research, and that is the most used platform for kids, or even kids, just people from ages like 15 to 30, I think it is. I was like, it's free, it's
Mhm.
accessible to everybody, it's
Mhm.
equitable, and it's global. So I was like, you know
Right.
what? I'm going to make a YouTube channel. And I titled it TeenChangers because it tied into the title of my dissertation. And because the two to me were kind of dovetailed together, of
Mhm.
helping adolescents, or really anybody, um, access that. So I've started creating videos that are really usually 3 to 5 minutes long, identifying the sub skills, what they are, some challenges of ways that they can practice them, and I've started morphing it into advisory lessons, because some people were saying, I wish I could do this in like my advisory groups, and so I started crafting some of those things so that the lesson is all done. I have
Mhm.
the lesson plan, or I have the slideshow, and I'm working on also feeding all the videos together, so that if you really just want to hit play, you can do that. Because in the reality, sometimes you might want to do this, and there's only so much time in the day as an educator. And sometimes it's really nice to just have it all wrapped up in a bow, and you can do it.
Mhm.
Um, and I have also just started creating some gamification units,
Oh,
mini
nice.
units that go into it. So I just finished with my students. So I'm in the process of tweaking it now that they've given me some feedback of the mishaps at Memory Motel. Um, and we were trying to escape the Memory Motel, and we were learning all about working memory and those strategies. And they were intense. And I think if I had presented it in another way, they would have been into it, but not in the same way. And we were able to practice working in groups, which is another thing,
Mhm.
particularly now with the, being further into the pandemic. A lot of my students have not had opportunities to work in groups for years.
Mm.
And so this
Mm.
is a
Right.
skill that we really need to hone. And they were really into it. So I was like, okay, so I'm on to something here.
Yeah.
And so now I'm getting the feedback from them, and I'm tweaking the storyline of it a little bit. And I've got about 75 videos. I've always got a whole bunch in the works.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm really excited to share those. And it ties into the website of teenchangers.com, where I have some of the lessons laid out, and speak a little more to adults, and put resources and educators. And I have a tab for caregivers as well.
So it's
I've
not just teenagers you're gearing the teen changers to.
It's really not. It's really
Yeah.
not. At this point, really anybody could use it. I've had I had an educator come to one of my workshops, and I think she was music in like third or fourth grade. And she was like, you know what? I can totally use this idea of the eat an elephant. And we ended up coming up with this really cool idea of a lesson just after a workshop. And I was like, oh my gosh, we totally have to write this down. And I got it in there, and it was so exciting. So as with anything about executive skills, you can take it up or down, and using that language. My videos are probably more geared towards a middle school, middle level mindset. Someday when I get a little more time, I'd love to do a little more for high school, because I think they have a different approach
Right.
to
Right.
sell it with them. Um, but I think it's a lot of fun to do.
Yeah, and that middle school is a great place to start because they tend to get lost in the middle. I mean, there's tons of stuff for elementary, and it's a whole different set of stuff for high school students, but middle school students really need something that's for them. So I'm happy that that's where you started.
That
So
I agree.
yeah, what can people find on your website? So you have a YouTube channel called Teen Changers, but you also have a website called teenchangers.com. So
Correct.
what do people find there?
So I've done a couple of some blog posts that I'm getting started. I'm kind of working on dabbling into taking them and actually doing a podcast that I'll put on there.
Nice.
I think it's another one of those things that I find I'm doing a little more of when I'm sitting in the car. So that might be something, again, I'm trying to think of particularly educators or caregivers, if you're sitting in the car and waiting for a lesson or you're driving to school, and talking about some of the videos and some of the questions that I've been asked or some of the challenges that I'm seeing in my classroom, and sharing those with people. In addition, I have some lists of resources. Some are executive skills, and some of them are books that I just found were really powerful that speak to what we're trying to do, such as, like The Power of Habit. And there's a lot of different cognitive psychology pieces out there that I think can be really powerful to speak to people. And so I call them shelfaries, like a shelf and a safari all together.
Clever.
You kind of see where my mind goes. And so I keep trying to just kind of highlight some of those different pieces. I also share some of the presentations that I've done for other schools that are in the area, and what I've done for people in my building, in my district, just to, again, say here's where some of the theory is. Here's that classroom experience, and how do we mesh those together? It doesn't have to be an add-on. I would argue that it really shouldn't be an add-on, and nobody needs to see it as something in a completely different box that we're just checking off, where it really flows beautifully into other pieces. And with everyone, particularly right now, speaking to social emotional learning, this is a really nice segue, a nice bridge into all of that, to really still continue to be using curriculum to drive the social emotional learning and the executive skills that, again, I would argue are there. We just need to allow them to unlock them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, you mentioned a number of new directions you're going towards in terms of blog posting and gamification kinds of stuff and social emotional learning. Is there anything else that's on your horizon that you haven't mentioned yet?
I got to think about that. I always have there's so many ways. If I could be a full-time YouTuber, I probably would do that. And I just love sharing it. I would love, one of my sort of dream goals, and I'm going to say it because I find that if I actually say it out loud, I'm a little bit more able to commit to it. I would really love to write a book that takes a lot of the information and the way that I got it from my dissertation and present it in a way to educators that I think doesn't sound so researchy, and where it just kind of speaks to here's what I learned, here's what I'm doing with it in terms of practical application, here's, I don't want to say permission, but in a way, kind of permission to try this and go out and do that, because any little bit we can do in a classroom with a whole group is better than nothing. So even if it's just starting with one little piece, it's not like you need to completely revamp everything and start from scratch, because that's always overwhelming. And I've been adding in just a little layer at a time every year, and those little pieces add up.
Yeah.
If everybody was able to do that and bring it to the forefront of their mind, even just for a little bit, how much more would they get?
Well, and the nice thing about so much of your work and a lot of things on your YouTube channel is that these are small, bite-sized, digestible pieces that people can use. It's not, okay, here's this massive curriculum. It's going to take you 12 months to do, and you have to do it in this order every week, which, I don't think, just reading the research on social emotional learning, there's a real argument to be made for not following an SEL curriculum with all its elaborations, but just building a little SEL stuff in every day. So, and you're doing the same thing with executive skills. So that's just very cool. And I would encourage you to write a book. I can certainly put you in touch with my editor at Guilford Press. I'll put a little plug in for my publisher because they're great. I've already worked with one teacher who's done that. She worked with the elementary level. So I think if we can get the next level up, that would just be fun.
That would be exciting. And I think it would help me kind of as I've shared with my students, task initiation is my hardest executive skill. And so sometimes just being brave enough to just start and take the leap is all it takes. So that would be exciting to kind of put that all out there.
Great. Well, we will talk more about this.
Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Rachel, for taking the time to talk about this. And I know you're going to edit this, so I will wait and I will post it on my website and you'll post it on yours and we'll go from there. But again, I'm just really glad that people have a chance to hear what you've been doing and to connect what led you to create the TeenChangers YouTube channel, because I think that helps people think about how you integrate this stuff into the classroom. So
thank you so much for being willing to talk about this with me and continue to share it. That's really my goal, is I want people to be able to use it and to access it. And even if it helps one person, one adult, or one student, then to me, that's the success.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Okay. Very cool.
All right.